Hi, I'm Jeff, lead pastor of Northview Community Church in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And this podcast is where I get a chance to interview people about things that I'm interested in and talk about whatever I want to talk about.
Welcome back to another pre-conversation conversation. My name is Levi. I'm the producer of this show, here to sit down with Jeff and talk about some stuff he has promised to have opinions about.
So many opinions.
That's very good.
Here they come. Ready?
Fast and Furious. Well, we're just going to talk about two things
Okay.
for a matter of minutes.
You don't really tell me much about this before we do it. That's what I find interesting about this. You tell me, hey, we're going to talk about this subject and that subject. I'm like, oh, okay. Which is either a good thing or a bad thing. I usually know a little bit about the subjects, but it's really a sign that I have stupid opinions about nearly everything.
Well, whether it's good or bad is
none of what I'm about to say is
you.
the view of Northview Community Church or the Mennonite Brother Conference.
Or me necessarily.
Or anybody. Okay, go ahead.
Significant in the world of archaeology and biblical studies, there's been a new discovery of some more Dead Sea Scroll fragments recently. Can you tell us a bit about what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, why they're important, what they mean for us in the present?
There was a community called the Qumran community that, very, very, very old community, that Jewish community that lived up in or hid these scrolls up in caves near the Dead Seas, and we have found them in the last 60 years or whatever. I think the earliest ones were in the late 40s, I think. But what's interesting about them is that they have the book of Isaiah's on them, or another, some Old Testament. And now the new ones, I think you said, that are some New Testament manuscripts. So they'd be in Greek and the Old Testament in Hebrew. And what we find is that the Hebrew book of Isaiah that's on the Dead Sea Scrolls matches up really well with the manuscripts that we already have, which means that it gives us greater confidence that the text of the scriptures that we have are consistent and true. And there's a process called textual criticism, and the question really is, okay, so in Greek, which I'm better acquainted with, but say in Greek, you'll have the way that they did it. They didn't have copy machines or anything, and so the original would be passed around to different churches, and in order for the churches to pass it on to other churches, they wanted to keep a copy, so they had to make a copy, and sometimes they'd make like 8 copies. So the copyists, you know what it's like. You copy something by hand, and you might make a little mistake here or there with the phrasing, or your eyes just run into the next line, and you record that, and it's just we call it typo, right? So there are a lot of typos in these, and then they had things called scriptoriums, where the guy in the front would read the Greek, and everybody else would write it down. And some Greek letters sound the same. Is it an omicron, aw, or an omega, oh? So, how do you, what exactly is the word? And so you have these different manuscripts that come out from different regions, and some of the regions have similarities. They'll call the Western text type Byzantine, Anyway, that's way too much information for most people, but the point is that we come at our New Testament that we have today by a process called textual criticism, where we narrow down based upon several rules, like what we think the actual original was. And so if we find old manuscripts that have something saying not only similar but almost identical to what we have, we're like, oh, we did it, this is great. And it gives us greater confidence in Scripture. That was more than you needed to know.
But I like knowing it.
Do you like knowing it?
Yeah.
Textual criticism actually was one of my favorite classes in seminary, because it was like playing detective in the ancient world. It was a lot of fun. You had to figure out, okay, what happened? Why is this version different than this other version? And then you come up with actually it looks like the copyists, just wrote, it said, this word sounds like this other word, and this other word was earlier in the past. You see? So it's kind of fun to figure it out.
So what is to stop me when I read an article like this and I think, what if they found a whole new book that seemed like it was written at the same time as the New Testament letters? It seems like it was written by somebody pretty reputable. What is it that stops me from making the leap from that discovery into saying we should consider adding this to the Bible that we have?
Yeah, you need to, I mean, the early church had a really a narrow hole through which they allowed the books that we have to go through. So they were really critical of them because a lot of people were writing in the name of Paul or writing in the name of Peter. So even a number of years ago, I think they found the Gospel of Judas or something, which was dated back to the 2nd century or something to that effect. And, some of the doctrine of it was all wonky and weird, and it showed more in similarity with the Gnostic Gospels than it does the Orthodox stuff we have in the Bible. So I would say the presence of lots of fakes should give you pause, and the recognition that there are all these fakes around there, and the early churches, stringent criteria should make you realize that we should have a significant amount of doubt about what those books are saying. Paul has. This is the question historically. He's come up with this. Like the Corinthian letters, we have 1 Corinthians and we have 3 Corinthians, but we don't have 2 Corinthians. I know that sounds weird. Our 2 Corinthians is actually 3 Corinthians. There is a sternly worded letter that Paul refers to in 2 Corinthians that's actually probably the second letter he wrote. So what if we found that? Right, that sternly worded letter. That's always been the question. If you found that, is that should we add it to the canon? And I don't think so. We have everything we need in the scriptures now.
That's helpful.
Is it?
Again, I like to hear this stuff.
Good.
I don't know if I'm our average listener, given that I tend to care about this stuff a lot.
Levi, there's nothing about you that's average.
That's what everybody keeps telling me, and they never say what they mean by that. Okay. So that's always comforting. Sharp transition. I think, I can link it.
Okay.
That was a popular opinion that I think you just voiced, that the scriptures matter and that we shouldn't add things to them willy-nilly. Would you say that's a popular
opinion?
I have an unpopular opinion.
Love that.
Which
Good
we'll
transition.
Get into. Well, yeah. We'll get into these from time to time. Today I had one that Jeff thought I was dead wrong about. At least in one instance. I'm going to voice it, and I want to hear your thoughts. My unpopular opinion is that with basically any sauce that you use, with the exceptions being ketchup and barbecue sauce, the addition of that sauce makes the food itself that you put the sauce on taste worse.
No, this is wrong. Listen, I'm willing to go with you on mustard because I don't have any idea why mustard is a thing that people like. It makes no sense to me. But mayonnaise on a sandwich makes the sandwich a little more bearable. Are we going to call butter a sauce?
No.
What if I melt it? You're just making stuff up now. And also, what about Cheese Whiz? Because Cheese
No.
Whiz makes everything better, doesn't it?
I strongly disagree with that one.
Come on. If you drizzle it, that's why people sometimes try to convince me that broccoli's great. Because they're like, what if I drizzled a little Cheese Whiz on it? I'm like, you
can make the same argument about tree bark then, I think. Doesn't mean the tree bark's good. It's just like a spoon.
Really? How come you have that opinion? That's dumb. It's just because you have barbecue sauce and ketchup are things that you dig.
Yeah.
I have a friend whose daughter puts ketchup on everything. By everything, I mean everything. Like you have to give, when she's eating, you give her the food, and then you give her the ketchup bottle. That's whatever it is. And she'll say, well, I'll eat it as long as I can put ketchup on it. See? So she's with you. Let me tell you, though, if you go to Subway and you get pesto and Caesar dressing on a sandwich, you're welcome. I just blew your mind. Hey, listen, you don't need to write in and let me know how I changed your life right there, but I did.
I think we'll agree to disagree on that one because I'm still convinced that I'm correct. That was our pre-conversation conversation. We're moving into an interview that Jeff did with Jacob. He used to be an intern at our church. They cover a lot of ground about Jacob's story, some things about racial issues. We trust you'll benefit from that conversation.
Hi there, this is Jeff, and I'm with Jacob, Gebrewold, but we just had a conversation before we came on that Jacob can be called Jake because that's how I know him and have known him for a while. He was actually an intern at Northview a while ago, but now he has gone and flown the coop and done great things. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm doing all right things, honestly. At this rate, there's a lot of things I miss about working in the church and all that sort of stuff, but I love being in the marketplace too.
Yeah, you're not working in the church now, but you are still a missionary.
Yeah, God's people sent everywhere we go, right?
That's absolutely right. So listen, most people who are listening to this don't know a lot about you, so I would like you to tell them about you. Where are you from? How did you come to faith in Christ? What are you doing now? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How did you end up there? You might need to tell people too that you hate college, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Oh man, I love how amped you get about that topic. So I'm the kid of 2 Ethiopian refugees. I always say if someone wants to know me, they should probably know 4 things about me. First is I'm the kid of 2 Ethiopian refugees. Don't tell anyone that'll listen. That gave me my grinder, workhorse sort of spirit. So kid of Ethiopian refugees. Second is that I was raised a spoken word poet, so a lot of love for language and the beauty of words to move and impact people. Third, I was raised a debater as well, so I had the chance to get scouted and compete internationally doing that. And debate is, I think, a large part of me, case building, orator, that sort of type. And finally, I want to one day elder in the local church. If there are lots of unknowns in life, probably the thing I sense the most clearly one day is that the Lord would have me elder in the local church, Lord willing, of course. But yeah, you put all those things together, you probably have a decent idea of me. Right now, I work in sales, so I'm an account executive at a startup in Vancouver called Clue. We're a tech company that helps businesses research their competitors. And I help run an organization called Sales for the Culture that helps get Black people into the tech sales profession and helps them flourish once they're there. So that's kind of all the pieces of me in a nutshell.
Wow, that's really great. Like super concise summary. I love it. Like no wonder you're a debater. You got to do the time. By the way, when you did debate, were you a debater where they have to talk super fast, or was yours more qualitative than that? You know what I'm talking about? Like debaters sometimes are like,
That's super American. I can feel your American roots coming out, Jeff. I don't think the way that, so there's kind of 2 main tracks. I always say there's the American track of debating, and then there's everyone else.
So there's the right one and the wrong one. Yep, got it.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but there's a kind of an international circuit at the high school and at the university level. So I didn't do a whole bunch of university debating for reasons I'm sure we're going to get into later, but I did a little bit of it. And then in the high school circuit, I had the chance to help coach the Canadian national team, just one of the supports there, and help judge at the World Championships. So in that style, I think we talk faster than average, but not as fast as Americans.
Right. So I want to investigate each one of the things that you said about yourself a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
That's why
let's do it.
No, that's why you're here, because so that we can talk about all of those things. You are one of the most interesting. But you ever seen those commercials? The most interesting man in the world. That's you, because you have so many. Yes, you are. You're.
I have biblical reasons to reject that.
Okay, fine, but I still think you're really interesting. So here's the thing. I want to know a little bit about. I want to ask you a question about argumentation in our culture. Right. So let's deal with the debate thing first. When you say you're a trained debater, that means most debaters deal with what? Informal logic? What is that? What is informal logic? What do you learn in debate? Give me a 1-minute debate class. Go.
If you're in the sort of debate that I would do, which is either world schools debating or Canadian national debating format, just a few different styles, the core of what you're trying to do is you have a judge, you have an opponent, you're assigned a topic, and you're assigned the side. So, I mean, you could be debating everything from arms sales of the West to Saudi Arabia being good or bad. You could be debating, environmental policy of conserving, endangered species. You could be debating all sorts of things. And you don't get to choose what side you're on necessarily. You just got to find the best argument for the side that you're representing. And really, you got to identify a problem. You got to show how your side best deals with the most compelling problem and why the impacts of what it is that you're going to accomplish on your side are more important than the other teams. At the end of the day, you do that more effectively than your opponent. In the eyes of the judge, you win the debate.
What is more effectively? Like what are you trying to? I get it. So it's not so much about your particular viewpoint; it's about your approach to defending or advocating your viewpoint. What kinds of stuff do you do to advocate for your viewpoint? Like what kinds of things count?
Yeah, it's a good question. So part of the fun of this is part of a debate. A part of the debate is debating about what should merit someone to win in the debate, right? Like, it's not just that you're having an argument that you're bringing forward with some otherwise defined criteria. Generally in a debate, right, the motion and the side you're assigned are probably going to imply that you've got certain things you need to defend, but you've got a little bit of ability to set the turf for yourself. And really what you want to do is prove that you have conceptualized what's most important with respect to the topic, and that at the core of what we should be valuing most as a society, whatever principles you want to lay out, make a decent case for why that is the case, why either the status quo or what the other teams bring to the table violates that in such a way that it just makes more sense, right? You're justified in principle, you're beneficial in outcomes, you're effective in getting to the results that you say you're going to get to throughout your argumentation. If you're more justified, effective, and beneficial than the other team, generally, of course, it can vary from debate to debate, but if you can accomplish those things, you're probably going to end up winning.
Do you think that the reasoning that, has debate taught you that the reasoning that you see in the public square is good, bad, what?
Well, first thing I always say to people about being a debater is you have to go through communication rehab after you've done debate if you expect to talk to real people in the real world. For a few reasons. One, in debate, there are some things that are assumed, right? It's assumed that your judge is someone who is relatively well-read. You're not going to have to debate like basic facts about the world with them. Those things relatively can be assumed. You're also assuming that the judge is following you logically, right? That if you say something clearly and A leads to B leads to C, then your judge should generally buy that argument unless the other team breaks it. You assume that saying, demeaning the character of the person that you're speaking against is not necessarily a path to victory, right? So there's just some assumptions there that when you get out into the real world, they don't necessarily hold up. And I think probably
No, because that seems to be the path that most people take. I mean, the ad hominem, the attack on a person's character. Like, dude, have you seen Twitter? Do you know what Twitter is?
Yeah, I'm mildly familiar, Jeff. But
But seriously, isn't that what Twitter is? It's just like, I hate you. Because you...
I will say, Jeff, my favorite difference to consider between a debate and honestly, like what I do in sales, right? I got a rude awakening because obviously in sales, like you have a product or a service, you're hoping for the other person to understand. Obviously, if you are actually able to help them, that's the big asterisk on the conversation, like what you do is actually helpful for them. You're hoping to show them that in a way that they would want to buy what you have. I remember when I first started in sales, I treated it like a debate. And I went, this is why this is like the best thing for you to buy, A, B, C, like, let's go. And
exactly. I win.
And people would not buy from me. And I was floored. I'm like, I am objectively correct here. What's the issue? And the challenge was in a debate, the person that you're disagreeing with and the person who's evaluating the merits of that disagreement are different people. Your opponent and your judge are not the same person. And for the rest of your life, pretty much, not on all situations, but pretty much, the person that you're disagreeing with and the person who's deciding how the disagreement went is the same person.
Right. And so when they are the same person, how you come across is often as important or more important than the logic that you use.
Yeah, in so many ways. And I found, whether it's in evangelism or in obviously my day job in sales or just in my day-to-day relationships with people, when I'm so focused on being right. And unfortunately, I feel like this is come across a lot in the communication styles of a lot of Christians that I know, and particularly the ones that swim in our sort of theological circles. Like we're systematized and we know our Bible and those sorts of pieces. Like we like to be right in the eyes of God and right in our thinking and all that sort of stuff, which aren't inherently bad things, but in the way that we can communicate sometimes in our subculture of our bubble of the Christian world, we can forget to win the heart over just winning the argument, and that often leads to maybe not the most productive conversations with people. So that's probably my favorite difference to consider between debating and the rest of life.
Right. And with your wife, I'm sure that you use the truth-oriented approach and not the winsome one, because that's the way it works. I mean, marriage advice for you. You just got married.
Yeah,
so
we got married 6 months ago. If we make it to the 1 year mark, it will be because I didn't follow that advice.
Yeah. If you win the argument, that your wife will really appreciate it.
My wife is normally right on most things if we're disagreeing. So it just takes me some time to realize. But and I don't just say that out of my rear. I really do mean it. She's got a pretty good head on her shoulders.
Totally. So listen, you are the son of Ethiopian refugees. So why were your parents refugees?
It's a good question. My dad was once upon a time a Marxist, Leninist, like real hardcore rebel against a pretty heavy-handed Ethiopian government. So when I have friends who love considering, Marxism or communism and socialism and all this sort of stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if you know people that really were about that life, but I do. My dad, and things got a bit heated in Ethiopia at a certain point. Eventually, he was in the Air Force and decided that he couldn't really stay there. Was led through a wild story that I hope will be a Netflix special one day. He's led by some guides through the forest through the desert to try to get to Djibouti. And the guides, he didn't realize, were Somalian. And for those of you that aren't really well acquainted with East African geopolitics and whatnot, but at that time, Ethiopia and Somalia were in the heat of war, right? So the fact that it was like, oh wow, these guys in the Air Force, like these are the guys killing our brothers back home. Like, we're not taking them to Djibouti. Like, they walk them up to a point, and they take all their stuff, all my dad's friends' stuff, and go over those hills there. That's Djibouti. They get over the hills and they're at Somalia, met at gunpoint. Bury the dog tags, eventually get, they don't get found out for being Air Force people, but they do get thrown in prison in Somalia anyways. My dad proceeds to talk his way out of Somalian prison. Thankfully, Amnesty International and the Canadian government and a Mennonite church in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan helped get him out and get him and his friends started in Saskatoon. So that's kind of the context with which my dad left Ethiopia and came to Canada. My mom, more of a direct route.
So they were in Saskatoon. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Saskatoon.
Yeah. So were you born in Saskatoon? Is that your
I was born in Burnaby. So my brother was born in Calgary. I was born in Burnaby. I was raised in the Tri-Cities, so Tri-City Church, which is at Northview. Are we still a campus of y'all, or did we roll off yet?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
No, we're not going to let you go until you fulfill certain requirements.
Well, we are
that change all the time. Yeah. I am basically I am the Bonnie Henry of the church.
That's so great. The bar ever raises. The bar ever raises.
Yeah.
That's good.
2 weeks from now, you'll be off. Sorry.
My context with my parents raised, but they were fleeing a pretty terrible government situation back in Ethiopia. Raised us here in BC. I was brought to an Ethiopian Orthodox church maybe once a month. Maybe twice a month until I was about 11. Only problem is I don't speak a lick of Amharic. So I could have been at a Bolivian church. I could have been at a Hungarian church. I knew nothing that was going on. Bible was not read to me in my home. Could not tell you any more about Christianity than anyone growing up in a post-Christian society. But I got to high school and people said, oh, if you're a Christian, colonialism, residential schools, LGBT community, please explain. To which I did not have a good explanation, to which I said, I'm spiritual, I'm not quite religious. And that's kind of where I rode up until I got to know Jesus at 19.
Yeah, that's great. I want to know though, so, I'm from the States, and so if I ask an African American person, they're going to have probably a little bit different context than you because you grew up in Canada. But is my assumption about you being a black man growing up in Canada, am I wrong about that? Like your experience is way different than, an African American man who grows up in, I don't know, Los Angeles or something like that. Or kind of asking you, what's your experience growing up in Canada as a black man?
It's a great question. And for a couple of reasons. One, I was raised by Ethiopian refugees, immigrants. I was raised much more to be cognizant of my Ethiopianness by my parents than my blackness. My dad was like, yeah, you're black, just so you know, in case you weren't aware. But my mom was a bit more like, wouldn't even want me to hang out with other black kids. In fact, one of the things in Burnaby, where I was at the time, there's a decent black population where I was born, but my parents moved us out to the Tri-Cities because they didn't want us getting in the mix with a bunch of other black kids in the area that were either getting up into trouble or treated a certain way that would lead them to. So it was really interesting growing up for me. So thinking of myself as a black person, I would definitely say it's not as intense as racism can be in the United States. But I think a lot of Canadians then give us a pass and go, oh, so it's not that bad. It's like, that's not what I said. But you're shaped so much by how the world interacts with you. So whether or not my parents taught me to think of myself as black in a lot of ways growing up, the people who I encountered at school would go, what's Ethiopian? Like, you're black. And you're a nerdy black kid. Like, we don't really have a box for that yet. You know what I mean? Obama didn't step on scene until I was 13, and that changed a lot of the way that people perceived me. But I had a really hard time growing up because I didn't fit into this Americanized mold of what pop culture would say a black person is. And I kind of got both the tough ends of the stick. I didn't get maybe the benefits of being a black kid growing up, that, positive things that can come from that. And I didn't also have an experience spared of different treatment from being a black person. I'm sure the next question is, well, what was that different treatment like? But was there anything you wanted to jump in on before I?
No, that is my next question. What is the difference? What's the different treatment like?
I think a couple of parts. Right. So I can broadly, characterize being black in Canada and like where the differences in outcomes would be, right? Child and youth development. I mean, whether that's educational outcomes being worse measurably consistently for black people in Canada than non-black people, and particularly white people. That's a commonly documented phenomenon, but I'll boil this down to like my lived experience, right? I almost got sent to a correctional school growing up. Now, keep in mind, I ended up getting a full ride scholarship to business school twice over. Like, I'm relatively academically all right, but I was inches from being funneled down that school to prison pipeline we hear so much about, with my dad regularly, like week after week, having to sit in front of my teacher, pod team leader of teachers, vice principal, counselor, all basically like ripping into my dad, being like, your son is a problem kid. When really I was just an excitable guy with a lot of questions. And beyond that, I mean, I would get these weird questions from my teachers that kind of assumed that my dad wasn't around when there was no data to support that whatsoever. And it was a different sort of experience than I knew the other kids I went to school with grew up with. And so the fact that whether it's assumptions about a child's home life or escalating quicker with a certain sort of kid than you might with one that you can maybe relate a little bit more to, I can't read too much into intentions, but I can tell you that as someone who was very much slated, like on a specific plan set up to then go to a correctional school growing up, like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I guess that's one way that I've experienced some of that, like, we talk about like systematic bias in education. Like I've definitely experienced that, and had other teachers, ironically in middle school, like I had a middle school teacher that this was especially bad with, and another middle school teacher that I had, him and I caught up after I graduated high school. And I was talking to him about this stuff, and he was so heartbroken to hear about this, and heartbroken that he didn't intervene further, knowing how disproportionately I was being treated, but not really having a full insight back then. So yeah, that's just, I guess, one example. Do we want to keep going?
No, that's great. No, that's great. I am really interested, given your perspective, and I mean, you're a really capable thinker. So I am really interested in your take on some of the recent race relations stuff, the discussions and things like that. It seems like even Christian gets involved in the Christian church a lot.
Mm.
Like, what would you tell a Christian about race relations and their part to play in it? Is there something that you would say to them, whether they're white, black, whatever? Would you tell them, look, this is what you need to understand?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of trying to break things back down to first principles, right? Jesus, what's the most important law of them all? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And seconds like it, love your neighbor as yourself, right? A lot of people like to, stray from, I wouldn't say stray. They don't want to get caught up in like this social gospel and all these other things that they feel like are circulating around in modern Christian culture. But they want to stick with the first principle stuff, a person of the word. I'm not getting lost in the whole Marxist thing. I'm gonna love the Lord God all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love my neighbor as myself. And there's only, I guess, one issue with that. Jesus is quoting specific verses there, right? He's quoting from Deuteronomy with the Shema, talking about loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think a lot of people know that, but I don't know if a lot of people consider where Jesus is quoting from with that second commandment that's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't want to steal your thunder if you talked a lot about this before. Like, is this something that Northview's preached through at all? Or?
No. And this is actually an issue that I think most people at Northview and in the Fraser Valley in general and Christianity and stuff, like it is a distant, we watch a little bit from the distance on the sidelines, and we just watch the fights going on in the States and other people who are highly involved in it. And we just wonder I don't understand what's going on, and why can't they just get along, and how should I think or feel about this sort of stuff? And so they end up getting their viewpoint mostly from conservative political voices. Not that that's necessarily wrong, but it is certainly one-sided in terms of, the way that they portray some of that sort of stuff. And so I'm really interested to hear, your take on it. And you're right, that is a quote. Where's it from?
Yeah, Leviticus 19. Gotta love me some Leviticus. If someone hasn't had the chance to go through this section, like there's one spot in the whole Torah that uses the specific wording of love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is dropping into a very particular passage, and that passage, Moses is laying out for the Israelites a whole bunch of laws, but in this section he's really leaning in on laws as they relate to justice, and loving practically those who are, whether we want to talk about power, enfranchisement, or whatever term someone wants to put here. I don't want to jargonize it and get like boxed off to the side, but those who don't necessarily have all the same power as maybe you or me. And he's talking about the sojourner, the foreigner, the poor, the disabled. He's talking about those who are not like you in a lot of ways, those who might have systems. He's talking in one part specifically about the legal system that one has, or a nation has.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, just not to cut you off too much, but the Good Samaritan is like the lived out, the example that Jesus uses. Yeah. And it's interesting that it's these racially, I mean, they're close racially, Jews and Samaritans, but sometimes the closest racial folks have the most animus between them, and it is very much the other. So he actually tells a story. Oh yeah, those people over there that you hate, or you think that they hate you, or whatever. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the neighbors.
And I would not do justice to preaching this whole passage. Ligon Duncan has a phenomenal sermon on this that he did together for the Gospel Conference. If one's interested in diving into that text, getting unpacked further, particularly in this context. But what I zoom out to. What do Christians need to think about? I think we have a quick reflex, maybe because media in a lot of ways has put the gun on Christians in some ways of looking for every moment that maybe we've done something wrong or not right or not as right as it could have been. And at times we feel a little bit like, we got to stand up for ourselves here. And I don't know if we realize it, but there's a very clear sifting that the Lord's doing in us, I think, right now, of our desires to be constantly in the right and perceived as in the right when we're talking about these matters of justice. And in two parts. On one hand, it's are we really practicing righteousness? Are we loving mercy, doing justice, and walking humbly with our God? Are we, looking out for the other and those that don't have all that we have? That's one piece of it. But the other piece of it is, even if we do those things faithfully, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're going to be praised for it, right away or at all. And I think that, I don't know, there's something about Christian culture having been enfranchised as in power for so long in contemporary Western society that ripping that away from us, we don't like being called out or seen as, perceived as in the wrong, whether it's because we're actually doing wrong things or whether it's because we're not getting the praise or pats on the back that we used to. And we just gotta shake that. And there are serious consequences of us not doing so spiritually, and then also for our ability to actually participate in loving mercy, doing justice, and walking humbly with our God and culture.
Right. Jake, am I wrong in, so here's my a little bit of a take. It seems to me that in the race relations discussion that's live right now in the Christian church, it seems to me that there's a great number of African American or Black people who are Christians who are saying this is our experience.
Yeah.
This is the way it feels to be both not in just a white culture, but in a white not governed, but highly influenced white church setting.
Sure, yeah.
And this is our kind of, we all have a similar take on it. And yet there seems to be a big pushback from, it doesn't matter if it's white or whatever, but there seems to be a big pushback from that white run church saying, hey, wait, no, you're kind of wrong. Am I wrong in the way I take my take there? Because I
don't think so.
As a Christian white leader, I think to myself, well, gosh, if this massive bulk of brothers and sisters in Christ in whom the Spirit is active are all saying, hey, we should probably think about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if the right posture for us is to push back immediately. Maybe there's some things that they're saying that are not right, but at the same time, man, so many are saying it. Am I wrong? Correct me.
I don't think you are. And if we can dial it back, I think, to a few pieces. One, so I mentioned one problem. Where can I see predictably worse outcomes for Black people in Canada? One would be, child and youth development. A couple others can be job opportunities, can be income supports, can be access to healthcare services, can be profiling and worse outcomes in interacting with police and justice system. I can come up with a handful of fairly empirically backed problem areas, let's say. And so we've got problems on one side, okay? Problems on one side. And I think a lot of the challenge in the church is some of the voices that we've heard the loudest in taking these problems seriously have with it a whole other worldview than what we come to the table with. And if they're identifying a problem, and not just a problem, but they have some sort of recommendations on solutions or mechanisms to deal with those problems.
Right.
You remember earlier I was thinking about debate arguments, problems, mechanisms, and impacts, or problems, solutions, and impacts, right?
Right.
If I was to split this up, I go, well, these people who are the loudest voices in our society that are talking about this as a problem, I disagree with them on their worldview. I disagree with them on a lot of the solutions that they bring about. So probably they're not even seeing problems the way that we should see them as Christians. In reality, there are lots of Bible-believing, Spirit-filled, Jesus-loving black people, and white people for that matter, who also can affirm that these problems exist. And you don't need to huck your Bible out the window or bow the knee to Karl Marx to acknowledge that these problems exist. And also, in the solutions that we implement to deal with those problems, there's a lot of room for discussion there.
Yeah.
Intelligent people who love God, who take capitalism seriously or whatever. I don't know if anyone's caught on to this yet, but yes, me as a salesperson, I am a fan of capitalism. There are lots of ways to go about dealing with this, and those solutions can and should be seriously considered, but you can't meaningfully, seriously consider solutions to a problem that you don't concede exists.
Right. And that's the challenge. I hear you saying that in this fear of some of the political views that are attached to the parties that are involved in trying to address those issues, we reject the issues and their answers, saying, well, look, you guys are crazy and the issue's not what you say it is and whatever, but you can believe that it's an issue and that some of what the people are saying who are trying to address it are off base. You can say both those things at the same time. But you also, my thing is, I just would like the church to be willing to listen and be able to pick out the bones in the fish here. There's some pieces of the fish that need to be, I don't know, is that the right image?
I think it is. And I think I'll push even a little bit further. What we can do in our, social media activist, low cost justice, 21st century Western society, Christian or not, we love taking the path of least resistance. So an easy thing to do is go, yeah, maybe something should change. I don't know if I agree with the solutions that everyone's proposing, but there's probably something there. And just leave the most vague, actionless, impactless position.
But Jake, I'm taking this seriously because I said something about it to myself, and now that's the way that we do all the time. Yeah, I can acknowledge mentally that that's the case, but I don't want it to change perhaps the way we live. Hey, can I ask you, just because we're running out a little bit of time, can you give me, though, some practical ways for people to engage thinking more about these issues and ultimately, you're talking to a bunch of Christian people probably who are thinking, well, okay, then give me something practical that I can do to try to understand the issues better, or maybe able, to get to know, you understand all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing I'll lob is you do not have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to taking a very practical next step in your situation. I would try and consider what your situation is, right? So for me, I'm in the private sector, I'm in the tech scene, I am a salesperson. It did not take me very long to Google search, what are things that companies who are hiring, we know that one of the areas that we can see clear outcome disparity. And by the way, I'm not necessarily saying that everyone should have equal outcomes in every situation all the time.
No, you're a capitalist.
I do think that one, people should have equal access to opportunity, but two,
right,
if I can predict based off of some demographic feature about you that you're going to have significantly worse outcomes than someone who doesn't have that demographic feature.
Right, there's some issue behind that.
There's probably a problem, right?
Yeah.
Why should I be able to predict it with that level of effectiveness? It's not that every black person should have every same outcome as every white person. It's that if I can just point to a black person and go, odds are, I'm put it all on red here. You probably, as a college graduate, make 80% of the income or of the dollar that a white college graduate makes. I'm just gonna bet that money and be right. That's where we're. I think there can be an issue. But anyway, sorry. Back to the.
But your work is addressing that challenge. Some of the stuff you're doing right now with some of the
Yeah. So this is actually one of the things I was going to jump to, right? That you can look up what are practical things that I can do in my situation. There are so many different sorts of situations for me to then get into a bunch of them. But have you gone out and searched these things that you can be doing at your work, at your place of work, in your church, are you searching for these terms on Google? Because you can find 10 wonderful articles on the first page of Google of practical actions in your exact spot right now, I promise. And if you can't, shoot Jeff an email. The specific thing that I thought of when I was starting to, like, I was Google searching, I'm like, oh, there isn't really a solution to this particular challenge I was seeing, which was I was a Black person in the tech game and in sales, and realized I would love to know Black people that have done great work in this industry who could mentor me on how to do, like, not a handout, but like really put in the work to get to where they've gone to.
Isn't it? I mean, and that's the cases in me. You're working in IT, and some of the, I mean, Black people are so underrepresented in that field. Is that?
Yeah,
that's basically the case.
True. Like,
and so,
disproportionately, not just fewer by population. Like, if you check really anywhere, Black people in tech versus like the amount of the population they make up in an area outside of like the continent of Africa, it's dismally low.
Right, and that seems to be kind of a cultural thing, though. They think, well, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. Or, like, it's sort of it's not the fact. They don't, I don't know. You understand what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
There's a cultural reaffirmation.
Right? My brother and I are both in tech sales. We, growing up, didn't think about tech at all, because if you were to ask us about tech, I'd go, man, I can't code. And I don't think I would be great at coding or that I would enjoy coding, so tech isn't for me. But where this organization, Sales for the Culture, came out of to help deal with some of these issues to help get Black people into the game, started out like very simply. Like, I'm just talking about what's a practical thing that someone could do. I started to search for something for a resource for me to get mentorship from Black tech sales professionals. I couldn't find that resource. And so I took a step to try and make that resource. I put together a list of 100 names of Black tech sellers. I went on LinkedIn and I looked at different companies and I searched through their people and I found the Black ones and I put them on a list. And what started out as a list of 100 is now grown to a list of somewhere around like 2,000 names. And that around it, a community started to form of people that went, look, we're the ones who have made it, and we would really love to kick some game, to kick some wisdom, to mentor those who are coming on behind us and open up opportunities for Black people in this industry. Not just who are early on, but those who don't even know this industry exists, where you can, you can put in work, help solve problems for companies, and make six figures without a college degree. It's a remarkable profession. And so to be able to open those sorts of doors, that's what Sales for the Culture is all about. It's a community of Black tech sellers for Black people and Black tech sellers, so that we don't have to do this thing alone anymore.
Okay, Jacob, I just want to summarize, because what you've just said is so fundamental to the mission of God. I really do believe that what you said is, look, here's the kingdom of God. Here's what it looks like. It's diverse, and at the end in Revelation, we're going to all be wearing white coats, and everyone's going to have equal access to God, and we all do. And you've taken that and said that's the value of the kingdom. We live in a world where that's not happening, so you've taken your spot. Look, I'm in this particular field, and now you've tried to bring what I say the reign of Christ to bear. You tried to bring the kingdom principles back into your work, and you're trying to figure out a way to make that happen. And this is, I actually think, the call of Christ to most of us in our workplaces, is to figure out, how is lawyering not reflecting the kingdom of God? How is mechanicking not reflecting the kingdom of God? In some cases, it's going to be racial, and in other cases, it's going to be like, don't lie to everyone. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And so we are, as Christians, the ones who are supposed to bring some kind of redemption to the places that we currently are in. That our mission is certainly to preach the gospel to people, but also to live in light of the gospel and live in light of the kingdom that it ultimately creates, right?
Yeah. You should be a pastor, man. That's good.
I know.
That was helpful.
But this is what we're trying to do with these kind of conversations. Jake, you are a star. I think you're wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me on this discussion. You've had fun. Of course you have.
I've had a blast. Can I?
Yeah.
I know we're short on time, but can I ask a quick question?
Yes. You're supposed to ask me a question. Go.
It's what I've been thinking about for a while. Why do you care about this so much? Like, I know we're Christians. We're supposed to care about, every tribe, tongue, and nation, all that sort of stuff. But like, why is this planted a seed that's starting to really bother you?
an awful thing for, I know what, this is the thing that many Black people don't like white people saying, well, I've heard a lot of Black friends, but I have. And I have seen it happen in their lives. I've heard them talk about their experience in growing up and also in their workplaces and things like that. And I believe them when it comes to some of this. And I really do believe in the vision that the kingdom has. I mean, you're going to be really hard pressed to find that one of the first outgrowths of the gospel is that it breaks down social, economic, racial barriers. And so for me, I'm like, well, that's what the kingdom looks like, and we're kingdom people. So why in the church is this why aren't we more kingdom people? Mm-hmm. And certainly then part of our responsibility as Christian people is to figure out how we as Christians can see the kingdom come to fruition here and now. Will it totally be? No. But you know what? There are little flashes of it in places, in churches. And when it happens, man, it is a beautiful thing. I mean, a black man discipled me and mentored me. I would not be here doing what I'm doing if he did not invest his life in me, and God bless him for it. So I'm invested in it because I think it's deeply biblical and very personal to me. And I'll be the first one to say that I don't think that I have listened as well as I should have in the past. So I want to listen more. I want to listen more, because I don't know if I have a whole lot to offer other than the biblical kingdom-minded, exposition. But I also want to live my life in such a way that tries to bring the reign of Christ to bear in the situations I'm in. And God bless you for doing it, man.
And God bless you for listening. I talked a lot, so.
No, I love it. Hey, it's been great. It's been great having Jake, and it's been great having you guys join us. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Conversations with Jeff. Make sure you subscribe to catch up on all upcoming episodes. So until next time, love God, do what you want, and don't be stupid.